Here is question 1. Because I think I can. I think I would just figure out the root of the same thing with the coefficients for maybe 2x squared over x squared. There it is. Yeah. That was it. Yeah, I think that's it. We could super compensate and say, right, the limit of the product is equal to this. Yeah. That would actually probably make it more sense. Yeah, I'm sure there's some places. Time to guess. All right. I can't leave. There's a Maya and a Mia. All right, here we go. Question number 2. I'm sorry. No. Hi, Bill. How you doing? All right, that's good. Espresso lead. Question 3.
Top 6.
Definitely going to have to work this one out. I don't think you're just going to be able to pick it out of the answer sections. Once you guys see the answers, if you have questions, feel free to interrupt the game. Say something, be happy to go over.
One's a little tighter on time. Let's have about 20 seconds. It's a good opportunity to practice guessing logically. Hopefully you've been able to eliminate an answer or two, maybe. Time to guess. Hey guys, listen up please. 13 of the 30 whatever of you got that right, so that's definitely not okay. So let's just chat about this really quick. You guys all recognize the product rule? Product rule? Okay. So let's see here. Product rule, we'd start off by saying, I guess I'll just go over here. I don't like that. Let's go with this, and let's see here. So f prime would equal 1 d2, and d2 would be 3 times x squared plus 2 squared times 2x, right? So that's 1d2 plus 2. And then what's D1? 1, okay. So then you think, yes, got it. Then you look at the answers and none of them match, right? You might be able to eliminate some of the answers. For instance, well, I don't know. They all kind of have the same characteristic, they're all products, aren't they? So here's where I would challenge you to think about with this. Our answer as it currently stands is a sum, is it not? Something plus something. So what is it that you need to do to take something that's a sum and turn it into a product? Like, what do we call that? When you take something that's a sum or maybe a difference and you turn it into a product. Say again? Okay, yes, it is. It's changing its form, so you could call it simplifying. Here it is. This is the word. Yeah. So if you have something that's a sum or a difference and you want it to be a product, that's called factoring, right? Okay. So with that in mind, I think I'll simplify a little bit first here. So f prime would equal, let's see here, it'd be 6x times x minus 1 times x squared plus 2 squared plus x squared plus 2 cubed. Okay, so I just simplified a little bit. As far as factoring goes, do you guys see how there's a common factor of x squared plus 2? And not just one of them, but two of them. Both of the terms have x squared plus 2 squared. So remember, if you're ever trying to take something that's a sum or a difference and turn it into a product, that's factoring. So I'm going to factor out that greatest common factor. So f prime will equal x squared plus 2 squared. The leftovers would be 6x times x minus 1 plus, and then there would just be a single x squared plus 2 left over, because there used to be 3, and I took out 2, so now there's 1. So now I feel like this is starting to take a little bit better shape, right? Because now this sort of looks like C or D, doesn't it? Now that I've factored it, I can see that it's not going to be A or B, probably not E, but it's going to be C or D, it looks like. So then the only thing I got to do now is take this and simplify it. So x squared plus 2 squared. In here I get 6x squared minus 6x plus x squared plus 2. And this is kind of where it's at right here, because you can see that if you combined your like terms, you would end up with 7x squared, and that only agrees with D as far as an answer goes. So would it be fair to say that maybe the calculus was the easy-ish part? and seeing the algebra was the harder part? I don't know the answer to that question for you. I know for a lot of students doing this question in the past, they're like, oh my gosh, product rule, not that hard. The algebra was harder for me. So keep that in mind as you're working through practice tests and such. Complete the algebra. Take the algebra all the way through. Don't stop short and be like, I did the calculus. I'm good. I think you just maybe proved that maybe the algebra could be the thing. Anyways, something to think about. Any follow-ups or anything? Morning. Okay, awesome. Let's move on. All right, there is our leader. It's been a different leader for every question. 2 Mayas and a pineapple. Okay, question number 4. Here we go. So again, this is a no calculator question. I think the next couple of who's next, if they think the calculator is next, it's whatever that's worth. Seconds, it might be time to guess. Hey, that's pretty good.
Oh, good.
Good job. It's pretty close. Here we go. Question number 5. Okay, come on. Got about 5 seconds. Might be time to guess.
I thought A was green.
It's all over the place. I'm trying to make you think. Sorry. Really close.
That's an okay mistake.
Yeah. Normally on quizzes we test, it'll all be ABC. Actually, you know what? There's actually no E's now. It's all ABCD. So the fact that there's even an E is a little abnormal at this point. All right. I think this is question 6 or 7. 6 maybe? If we see some algebra considerations here. All right. About as close as it gets right there. There we go, question 7. Nice work, guys. Getting closer, Sean. All right, question 8. I love these questions. Not the worst. Oh, come back. Unsent. Have time to guess? Hey, let's take a second and talk about this one. Obviously, this was not as good as some of the others. So it might be helpful to take a table like this and make like a really rudimentary graph to help you understand what's going on. So if I tried to do that, I'm going to remember that the y-axis is actually f double prime. So the first point would be 0, 5, which we're going to say is right about here. The next one is 1, 0, which is there. 2, -7 would be down there somewhere. And then 3, 4 would be like right about there. Does that make sense? Okay. So the majority of you guys picked D. I didn't see too many A's, B's, or C's. We can talk about those if you want. The two big categories are definitely D and E. So let's talk about why it's E and not D. If I were to draw a graph of f double prime, if you picked D, I think you probably were assuming something like this, right? But can you really assume that? You can't. Just because f double prime is 0 doesn't mean that f double prime changed signs at that 0. It could, right? Obviously, this would be one scenario where it could, but it says, which of the following must be true? The graph has an inflection point at x equals 1. That word must is really important because if you can find only one counterexample, that's false, right? So maybe a counterexample could be, could you draw a graph that looks like this and cross somewhere else? That's a counterexample that disproves, right? Disproves D. You probably could also do something like that. Maybe. I don't think that violates the table. It does tell us that f is a polynomial, And so that means it is continuous and differentiable. That's obviously important for the way you draw this graph. But because we found at least one, maybe two counterexamples, there could be others we could draw to D, then E has to be it. E has to be it because you do see that F double prime does change signs, which indicates a change in concavity. But it doesn't have to happen at one. It could happen in a couple of different intervals there for that to be true. Does that make sense? This is definitely kind of the false thought that we battle a lot. Just because F or F prime or F double prime equals 0, it doesn't mean that it had to change signs there. It could have. It doesn't mean that it has to. Okay. Let's see what our leaderboard looks like. All right, it's still super close. All right, this is question 9. We only have 4 left. I didn't need E as an answer option. Was that something you would have thought of? Mine is right now. I looked at that and I thought, that one seems to be hey, that's pretty good. Yep. Oh, the pineapple is gone. 3 Mayas. All right, here we go. Question 10. You actually might have to read a sentence or two. picked A mostly. All right, so you guys, the majority of you picked A. Okay, so it says a rumor spreads among a population of N people at a rate proportional. So if it just said a rate proportional to the number of people who heard the rumor, then I would say A is right. Right? If it just said the rumor spreads at a rate proportional to, if it just said to the, well, here, I'll do this. Like if it just said to the number of people who have heard the rumor. So if we scratch out all the stuff in red there, do you see how that fits with A? Rumor spreads at a rate proportional to the number of people who have heard the rumor. That would perfectly go with A, dP equals Kp. But that's not what it says. It says that rate proportional to the product. What does product mean? Multiplication. Okay, so it's going to be something times something. And obviously, K times P is a product, but K is just going to be that proportionality constant. So product of the number of people who have heard the rumor. So number of people who have heard the rumor is Kp. And so if you notice, these first three have Kp, right? So it's going to be Kp times something. So the product of Kp and the number of people who have not heard the rumor. And so this comes down to either B or C. How do you decide whether it's N minus P or P minus N? Well, N is the number of people in the population, and P is the number of people who have actually heard the rumor. So wouldn't it be fair to say that N is greater than P for this whole experiment? Because N is simply the number of people who exist in this room or city or building, whatever it is. P is the number of people who have heard the rumor. So N has to be bigger than P, meaning that it really has to be this, because P minus N, wouldn't P minus N always be negative, or at least non-positive? And so then your rate would end up being negative, right? And they told you that K had to be a positive constant. So since the rumor is spreading, the rate of this has to be positive. So it's got to be N minus P versus P minus N. If K could be negative, then P minus N would be realistic, right? But since K has to be positive, it's got to be N minus P. And like I mentioned, BC folks, this is logistic growth. It's a little different form than we're used to, but it's still logistic. Okay, questions? Follow-ups? Okay. All right. Looking pretty similar. Here we go. Last two questions. Number 11 is up next. Pretty straightforward wording. Something to fit this in the time that you have. About a minute left. This would be a tough one to fit into this 2-minute time frame. Should be guessing on that. Oh no, what I'm referring to is guessing while they're still kind of. You're going to be here. Hey, guys, was this mostly a time thing, or did you just run out of time, or did you maybe not know sure what you're doing, or questions? Happy to do whatever. Happy to do it. Okay, so it uses kind of the magic words. Which of the following is a solution to the differential equation with this initial condition? So if this was an FRQ, this is one of those ones where you have to show the separation of variables and your antiderivatives and the plus C and all that stuff. So that's what I'll do here. I'll treat it kind of like an FRQ. So it would be y dy equals x squared dx if you use the separation of variables method. The next thing you would do is find your antiderivative. So it would be 1/2 y squared equals 1/3 x cubed plus c. And this is where I typically am going to plug in my initial condition to help me find my c. So I know that y of 3 is equal to -2. So that means -2 goes in for y. And 3 goes in for x. So that would be 2 equals 1/3 of 27, which is 9, plus c. So I'm getting -7 for my c value. Make sense? And then I'm just going to plug that back in on the step that I used to find my c. So that will give me 1/2 y squared equals 1/3 x cubed minus 7. And then lastly, it's just an issue of solving for y. So you multiply everything through by 2. Y squared is equal to 2/3 x cubed minus 14. And then you got to square root both sides. So maybe at this point you know that it's either going to be d or e. So y equals plus or minus square root 2/3 x cubed minus 14. How do you decide on the plus or the minus? Because that's going to be the deciding factor. Initial condition? Yeah. You look at your initial condition's y value, and that's -2. So you pick the negative out of the plus or minus. That's why you go with E. Follow-up questions? I heard you say, got it, right? Any follow-ups or anything to go along with that? Okay. All right, our last question with this leaderboard. Here we go. Probably time to guess. So let's see here. The majority of you did not quite get this one. As I was walking around, certainly a number of folks were like, if only I could remember what the derivative of arctangent was. So let's talk about it really quick. If you have arctan, like if you're going to do the derivative of arctan of u over a, that's equal to u prime times a over a squared plus u squared. So u just stands for some function in terms of x, and in this case, the u would be 4x, right? And the a value would be 1. So you could write that in here if you want, 4x over 1. So as you try to apply this form, you would then say ddx of arctan of 4x is equal to, well, u prime would be 4. The a value is 1. 1 squared is 1. 4x quantity squared is 16x squared. And then it's just an issue of plugging in the 1/4. So we could then say that ddx arctan of 4x evaluated at x equals 1/4 would equal 4 over 1 plus, it's 1 plus 1, isn't it? 4 over 2 is 2. Fine. Challenging math, right? Yeah. Okay. Follow-up questions on that one?
What's the formula for sine, arc sine?
U prime for arc sine, u prime over a square, over the square root of a squared minus u squared.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So I was chatting with a couple folks. You know, one of the purposes of this today and this whole week is to get you practice and remembering and all those things. But it might be one of these moments where you're like, oh my gosh, I forgot. You know, a month ago I knew this. Today I don't. You maybe need to go back and review a little bit. We'll be giving you guys a sheet of all the formulas and relationships and lists and things that you need to know. But this maybe is one of them. So we'll see. Let's see how this all finished up on our Kahoot. All right, who is espresso? Greater than depresso. Excellent job, Caleb. Second place was Maya, correctly spelled. Was that good? Okay. And one of the other variations of Maya. Okay, fair enough. Let's see the other ones. The other top 5 here. Okay, so there's Sean. Was that really Sean? Okay. And then who is our third Maya? There we go. All right. AB folks, it's time to knock them off their little thrones that they're occupying. It can be done. Definitely. Okay. Hey, we're going to hand out some FRQs, so we'll go ahead and get started with those. So let's transition over to that. Okay, here is C. Obviously, C was worth the majority of the points. Question?
I gotta use that.
For not distributing the negative element of 2.
So like, if we wrote this,
Also kind of think
You mean like simplifying it?
yeah, because it's the same answer.
we're to solve for that last one is when we're going to find C.
It should be plus though. I think, right?
Yeah, because you're subtracting a negative. That's why it's cross. Oh,
So this is, you know what the issue is actually? You didn't deal with this minus sign before you did e to both sides. You have to deal with that minus sign before you do e.
okay.
because you're right, e to the ln of whatever just equals whatever. Totally agree, but you did e to the negative ln of whatever.
Okay.
Not quite the same. So I would, if I were you, I would have plugged in my initial condition here, but even if you didn't, I would still multiply that negative over to get you to the place where you can solve for y. So how many points did you get? Okay, so you separated your variables, you have good antiderivatives, you have a constant of integration, so you for sure have 4.
Use the initial
And
condition.
yeah, I'd say 4 or 5.
Hey.
Yep. Although nowadays, you see how here they give you a whole point for putting plus c at the end of your antiderivatives?
Yeah.
Nowadays they don't. They give you 1 point for having a plus c and plugging in the initial condition. So it's a little different, but I'd say in this one for sure 4 or 5. Yeah. Guys, questions on C?
No.
The biggest frustration that I'm hearing as I walk around has to do with this symbol right here. Either having it or not, or dealing with it correctly or not, or whatever. That was definitely so far has been kind of the biggest deal. Maybe it wasn't even there when it should have been there. I don't know. Any questions, follow-ups? This is the most recent thing, so hopefully you're remembering this well, but any questions? Cameron. Oh, okay. Yeah. So, guys, Cameron was asking a good question about right here, right? Hey, let's see if you guys can answer this, at least in part for her. Why on earth is that even in there? What's that all about? You got to admit, all of it's true, but why is it even in there?
Because you could have, with the absolute values, you could put the negative out in front and change the whole solution.
Yes, that's right. It has to do with the absolute values. So they're just reiterating the initial condition, and as Josiah pointed out here, y will be y is less than 3. Therefore, so let me put it like this: if you think back to what you did here, to get there, didn't you do this? And of course, 3 minus 1 is 2, and so the absolute value of 2 is 2. So then when it comes time down here, at this stage, this is where, let me show you a couple steps. So on this step right here, if you multiply that negative through, you'd get natural log, absolute value of 3 minus y equals natural log of 2 minus sine of x. And then you e both sides, right? So when you e both sides, you end up with absolute value of 3 minus y equals e to the ln of 2 minus sine of x. So then the issue is, how do I evaluate those absolute values? Too many times people are like, well, I just dropped them. It's like, what do you mean you just dropped them? You can't just drop things for no reason. You've got to have a reason. Here's what we actually do. Isn't the absolute value of a positive number just that positive number? Right? Absolute value of 7 is just 7. But if it's the absolute value of a negative number, don't you have to change the sign of that negative number to evaluate the absolute values? And so when you look at this 3 minus y, you can say, well, okay, 3 minus y, is it positive or negative? I have no idea, do you? But if we look at the initial condition, we do. Right? The initial condition tells us that 3 minus y will be positive for our domain. Therefore, the absolute value of 3 minus y would just be 3 minus y. If 3 minus y was negative for our domain, then you'd have to do this. Right? But since it's not, we don't have to do any of that stuff. Okay? Thanks for asking. Guys, anything else? Okay, fair enough. If you have not moved on to Joanna jogging on a straight track somewhere, go ahead and move on to that. Ready, go. Yep.
Why is it a positive 220?
Why is it a positive 220? So Yeah, on B, it asked for total distance.
Yeah, Riemann sum.
Yeah, well, so, yeah, and then it's total distance, explain the meaning.
Oh,
So it's total distance traveled, right? But it's absolute value. So that's going to take, like if you look at your table there, if you put absolute values around this,
This all becomes
then
positive.
they're all positive.
Thank you.
Yep. Yep. How's everybody doing with Joanna and Bob? Any questions? I'll leave that up there for a while.
Wait, so 2 factorial over 3 factorial.
Were you thinking V of 16? Oh, okay.
How's the grading going? Good? Okay.
Yeah. Okay, we got this. We're good. They just like some total. Yeah, we do.
Jake, Peyton, how you guys doing? Joanna and Bob, okay? Yes, sir.
No, we're good.
No, you good?
I'm good. I just thought 6/3 is 1/2.
15 meters.
Oh,
Don't even worry about it.
you know, Jake, maybe sometime in the future they'll discover that that's true and you'll be vindicated. Yes. I'll be interested to see what people say about that. Bianca, how you doing? Joanna and Bob go okay?
Yeah, I just forgot how to do average velocity, so I just guessed on that one.
You forgot how to do it.
Yes.
So seeing it, does that fill in the blank for you?
Yeah, no, that makes more sense.
Okay, so it's like, you can think of it as like the average value of
Right.
velocity. All right, good deal. Good deal.
I think I
Guys, any questions about Bob and Joanna? How do you think you did points-wise?
I just couldn't.
7, 8, 9?
I couldn't
Nine?
do the math in the end.
Oh, so you messed up the...
Just all of that.
How far did you get?
Up until some reason I divided 10 cubed by 2 instead of multiplying by 2. I'm not sure why.
So I was at like the very last step.
When I'm going to get everybody's attention here in a second.
Yeah,
so you
yeah,
pay
yeah.
attention. Lauren, how you doing?
Good.
Joanna and Bob?
I
Going
got
okay?
stuck on the last one because I forgot the answer.
Does it make sense now? Okay. Okay, good. That's the point, right? I mean, it's like, you know it's in there somewhere. Just like bring it back up again.
Exactly.
Is there any questions?
75 divide that by 2.5.
Hey, could I get everybody's attention for just a second? Yeah. Had a great question that I think is worthwhile for everybody. So, you know, maybe you're like in depth thinking about the triangle question. Really, listen, really strongly suggest you pause the triangles for a second. I really honestly do. I think this is worth everyone's time. So I had a great question as far as scoring goes, and we are getting into that period of time when basically, you know, us as teachers, like our role is going to switch from being a teacher to more like being a coach. We're going to try to like coach you towards this test thing that you got coming up. And so from a points perspective and from a don't lose points perspective, let's take a look at B on Bob and Joanna. You can see on the right side, you know, step 1 or point number 1 is explanation. So that's all up here. You got to have that, right? Right Riemann sum. So they want to see evidence of a right Riemann sum. Technically, right here, the thing that I'm putting in the box, that's evidence of a right Riemann sum. Okay? But I want to point out this, that you could earn these 2 points right here, both of them, on this step right here. You could earn both. Let's talk about why that is. Isn't the stuff that remains from there on out simply arithmetic? And you can leave arithmetic unsimplified. There is no compelling reason for you to go beyond that. And if you get to that 7,600 meters, good for you. But the fact that you went from here to here earns you how many points? None. But if you, listen, I mean, those are some like relatively large numbers and you're doing a test and you're trying to do it without a calculator. Can you all acknowledge, I can too, that the possibility that you might mess it up is very there? And think about it. It's all risk and no reward, right? You're risking a point with no possibility of gaining a point for what you've done. So my suggestion would be to stop right there. Okay?
Just put like meters after that and all good.
Yeah.
Wait, and would you get both points for that step?
Yes. You would get right Riemann sum and the answer point as well.
So you don't even need the one above it?
No,
Okay.
you don't. Hey guys, can I point one other thing out on this? This is a really important thing. This would be a frustrating thing to lose points for. Notice, they want to see evidence of a right Riemann sum, and they want to see evidence that you use the table. So if you were to do this right here, in other words, you skipped this step and you skipped this step, and you did the thing in the red box, you would get the answer point, but you would not get the right Riemann sum point. In order to see a right Riemann sum, they need to see a sum and products of bases and heights. Okay? Make sense? So if you did all that arithmetic and you had to feel like, hey, I know that 12 times 200 is 2,400, whoop-de-doo, congratulations, you're not getting the right Riemann sum point, okay? You need to show evidence that that's what you did. Questions?
So could we leave D as
So let's talk about that too. Hey guys, D. D is another really prime example of this. It's a little bit different. So D, you're supposed to find the average velocity. So they wanted to see, you got the integral here. So you got to show your setup. And you got your antiderivative. There's your antiderivative. But you know what would have earned full credit? I'll write this off to the side. You could have said 1/10, and then it would have been 10 to the 4th over 4 minus 2 times 4 to the 3rd plus 300 times 4. Or, no, that's right. And then minus 0. That, 10. What am I doing? It's not 4, it's 10. My bad. I was hung up on. So what I just wrote would not earn you credit, but this would. There we go. You see what I'm saying there? So if you just plug in the 10 and obviously plugging in the 0 yields a 0 in this case, you could have earned that answer point for that right there. It's awesome if you can go to 350 and get all the way there, that's great. But going from a step like this all the way through to a step like that earns you nothing. No extra points for that. So just something to think about, because as I walked around, a pretty consistent comment was like, oh, I had the antiderivative, and then I forgot that 10 to the 4th was 10,000. Or, like some little minor arithmetic issue. That's going to lose you that point versus just stopping there and getting full credit. Okay? Good? Okay. Well, go back to the triangle question, which you're working on there, and we'll do some grading of that here in a few minutes. Please check carefully. Try to score yourself. Oh, this was a good one too. C has some interesting stuff. Yeah. Euler's method is always good to go back over.
Nope.
How you guys doing?
Fantastic.
So far, so good? 6, you said?
Yes.
It's good. It's real good.
Or like general. D?
Yeah.
I did check. Well, it didn't say anything. You guys open at 10? Wait, so do we have
Hey guys, it's definitely worth everybody's attention here. For sure, looking at A, B, and C, I hope A went well for you. A was essentially accumulation of areas. Worked through that one. C was a quotient rule, although you could have probably turned it into a kind of a convoluted product chain rule if you wanted to, but I think it was really intended to be a chain or a quotient rule, whatever that's worth. I wanted to talk to you guys for just a second about B, something really important, something that I see at the reading all the time, and or I should say something I don't see at the reading all the time, and that is this right here. So this statement right here is often referred to as maybe a connection point, because what you're about to do in B, you look at the wording there, as I walked around, a lot of you guys had this wording down pretty well. Hey, you know, G is increasing in concave down because G prime is positive and decreasing on those intervals. The truth is, you have very little information about G, don't you? You just know that G equals the integral of F. And in order for you to make statements like that, you need to connect what you're talking about with the graph. And so you have to write this down somewhere on your page. Maybe you write it up above. I've seen people, you see the triangle graph right there? You know, it says graph of F, right? Let me show you what I'm talking about. I've seen people do stuff like this. I've seen people just do this, where, you know, you see graph of F is written right here. I've seen people do this. This would earn you the connection point. They've just said G prime. You know, that's really a graph of G prime. You can essentially write this anywhere it is that you need to write it, but it needs to be written down on your page. If you're about to say, hey, G prime does this, blah, 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 based on the graph of F, you've got to connect the two. So if you don't connect the two, you're not going to get that justification point. So just be aware of that. Do you guys have any questions on A, B, or C? All right, here's D. Amazingly enough, 3 points, right? You have to show that you did the chain rule correctly. You could stop right there. Hey, if you're good, feel free to go. If you want to hang out for a few minutes, hang out. I'm here to help. Go okay?
Yeah, I got it. All of them except 1 point.
Nice. Great job, Nick. Thanks, man.